Nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dewbs & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m, and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even some ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, happy Friday to you. I'm Michelle Dewberry, keeping you company right through till 7 o'clock tonight. Now, we've talked about strikes, haven't we, for weeks, months, it feels like years, quite frankly. Are we finally at the end of the strike era? The government seems more open these days to talking, the unions seem more open these days to pressing pause on strike. Is an end in sight? And what do you reckon to the amounts being offered? Reasonable, fair, or nowhere near enough? Your thoughts on that? And what do you think when it comes to the war in Ukraine? How involved should the UK be getting? Slovakia and Poland now are sending fighter jets over there. Should we follow suit, or are you more in the camp which is, whoa there, Tiger? Can we just please accelerate the peace talks? What say you? And if you're a criminal, especially the absolute kind of disgusting type that is a serial killer, should you be allowed the privilege to get married in jail? Absolutely not, is what I say. Levi Belfield is the man I'm talking about. That is what he wants to happen. We, the taxpayer, will be picking up the bill for his legal aid to try and fight for his right to wed. Really? What do you say to that? Oh, God, it makes me infuriated, so it does. And Mother's Day this weekend. You know, at this rate, if we're not careful, we might end up actually just saying Parent Day. We've had Oxfam Charity issuing their kind of inclusive style guide and all the rest of it. Oh, honestly, sometimes I think the world is going mad. Speaking of your mum, by the way, do you ever take advice from her? Apparently, most of us do not. We only really start listening to our mums, apparently, when we're aged about 26. Do mums always know best or not? Your thoughts on all of the above, but first, let's bring ourselves up to speed with tonight's latest headlines.
Michelle, thank you and good evening. Your top story this evening on GB News. The International Criminal Court has issued an arrest warrant against the Russian president. It's accusing Vladimir Putin of war crimes against Ukraine, including the unlawful deportation of children from Ukraine to Russia. The Kremlin has described the claims as outrageous and says it doesn't recognise the jurisdiction of the ICC, while the ICC's president, Peter Hofmansky, believes there are strong grounds for arrest.
The judges have reviewed the information and evidence submitted by the prosecutor and determined that there are credible allegations against these persons for the alleged crimes. The ICC is doing its part of work. As a court of law, the judges issued arrest warrants. Their execution depends on international cooperation.
Deputy Prime Minister Dominic Raab says Russia must be held accountable.
This is a historic moment in the conflict in Ukraine. The International Criminal Court, which operates independently, has issued an indictment for President Putin and the Children's Commissioner for appalling crimes against children. And whilst they operate independently, it's really important the international community support them and give them the tools to do the job, which is why I'll be hosting on Monday with my Dutch opposite number 40 countries from around the world to give them the support to conduct the investigations, to look after witnesses, to care for the victims so that they can see this through and we hope have accountability for those appalling crimes.
Ukrainian MP Andriy Sadchuk told us he has no doubt Putin will end up behind bars.
We know about thousands of cases of Ukrainian kids forcibly deported from Ukraine to the territory of Russian Federation. In fact, by doing this, they want to replace native Ukrainian population with Russian population. The history of international justice is saying that usually it takes a long time to bring people like Putin to accountability. So that's why I don't have any doubts that Putin earlier or later will be sitting in prison.
Meanwhile, China's president will hold strategic cooperation talks with President Putin next week. Beijing and Moscow struck a no-limits partnership shortly before Russia invaded Ukraine. Western countries have warned Beijing against supplying Moscow with weapons, but China has denied such plans, criticising Western weapon supplies to Ukraine. In other news, a couple has been convicted for their role in the death of a 15-month-old baby. Jacob Lennon's mother, Louise, was found guilty of neglect and allowing the death of a child, while 33-year-old Jacob Drummond was found guilty of abuse with intent to harm. A post-mortem found the cause of death was a brain injury. They'll be sentenced on the 24th of April. Police Constable Mary Ellen Betley-Smith will keep her job despite being found guilty for attacking a former Aston Villa football player with a taser and a baton. Former striker Dalian Atkinson died after being kicked at least twice in the head by another officer, Benjamin Monk, who's been jailed for 8 years for manslaughter. Ms Betley-Smith was cleared of assaulting Mr Atkinson after a trial, but the Independent Office for Police Conduct found there was a gross misconduct disciplinary case to answer for her use of force. And the Prince and Princess of Wales have been celebrating St Patrick's Day with the Irish Guards. Kate and William have attended the St Patrick's Day parade in Aldershot. It's Kate's very first time at the parade as Colonel of the regiment. The royal couple also met with past members of the Irish Guards. TV, online and DAB+ radio. This is GB News. Now it's back to Michelle.
Thanks for that, Tatiana. Well, I'm Michelle Dewbs, keeping you company right through till 7 o'clock tonight alongside me. My Friday favourites, your Friday favourites as well, it seems. People always love it when these guys are on. Alex Dean is the political consultant and Paul Embry, the fireman, writer and broadcaster. Good evening.
Good evening to you.
You too. We'll love it when you're on, not least because I know it's Friday then, and that means it's the weekend coming.
You spent your whole week waiting for us.
I do.
There are other ways of knowing it's Friday, but I'm very flattered.
No, but this is the best one. This is the best one.
Right,
that's what I say. Anyway, you know the drill, don't you? It's not just about us three. It's very much about you guys at home. What's on your mind tonight? You can get in touch with me all the usual ways. GBViews at gbnews.uk is how you can reach me on email or Twitter, if that's more your thing. everything at GB News. Before I kick off the show, if you will indulge me, though, I would like to just press pause for a second just to pay a tribute, actually, to someone who, very sadly, we found out had passed away. We got the news today. She passed away last night, and it was a lady that I have so much admiration for and respect, a lady that many of you might be familiar with. She was a huge champion of women in business, CEO of Ann Summers, a shop which one or two of you might have indulged in a couple of the parties. If anyone's been to an Ann Summers party, you will know just how much fun went on at those parties. What went on always stayed in the parties, didn't it? But she was just such a huge inspiration to me, as I told her often. She was very kind, came over and did an interview with me. Not long after we launched, actually, she was also granted a CBE. She was just so talented and just so lovely. Let's have a little listen to a chat that we had on this very show back in June 2021.
If you've got a viewer that's uncertain, has lost confidence in themselves, doesn't know what to do next with their lives, what one piece of advice would you give to them?
You know, people are making changes in their life, and I think that's important. You know, I think if you're in a negative relationship or a job where perhaps you don't share the same values, or you've got this great idea you've always wanted to do, then I think this is a good time to go for it. You know, I think it's an opportunity. I see lockdown as being an opportunity.
Yeah, and I think also, for me, COVID has taught us you never know what's around the corner.
No.
You never know, and we can have all of these plans and all of these ideas, and we're going to say, oh, we'll do it tomorrow, we'll do it the next week. But tomorrow's never really guaranteed, is it? Jacqueline Gold, I could sit and talk to you. I could sit and talk to you all night, but unfortunately, that is all I've got time for. Thank you very much, Jacqueline.
And I could have talked to her all night long. She was honestly such a lovely lady. I highly recommend reading her book, her autobiography. She's just so inspirational. And as we were just saying there, you never know what's around the corner. Tomorrow is never, ever guaranteed. So, Jacqueline, I do hope that you rest in peace. Right, the show does go on, and with that in mind, there's so much we could have got into tonight. The strikes, though, I think, is where we will start our programme. We've had weeks, haven't we? We've had months of them. It feels like years and years and years. Sometimes it feels like a lifetime, but it also feels perhaps like the end is in sight. NHS staff now, they are apparently getting up to an 18% pay rise. It depends, obviously, what their starting point is, of course, but some of the other strikes as well. We've seen firefighters, Paul. They've agreed to kind of talks, etc., and offers. Teachers. Is the end of this strikes season in sight, do you think?
Well, certainly in terms of the firefighters' strike, which obviously is relevant to me because it's my profession, that strike has been averted as a result of an improvement in the offer by the National Fire Service employers, and that came about directly as a result of an overwhelming strike ballot that firefighters delivered just a few weeks ago. Really focused the minds of the employers and made them realise that we've got to come up with something more. So I think what it tells us really, Michelle, is despite people within the Conservative government and anti-strike people in the media saying strike action never works, you know, it's disruptive, it will never achieve anything, the truth is that it often does. It often does force employers and governments to move when they otherwise wouldn't do so. And I think we are seeing some movement on the part of the government where they have influence and employers as well as a result of strike action. And that's a good thing. And these things are always settled by negotiation and compromise. No side ever gets what it wants. We in the FBU, Fire Brigades Union, didn't get everything that we wanted by any stretch of the imagination. I guess the bigger question is, why was it necessary for unions and workers to feel that they had to take strike action in the first place when it was quite obvious to everybody that real wages were falling quite seriously, still are falling quite seriously, that there is something sick with our economy in terms of, you know, fundamental wealth and income inequality. And that should have been addressed. It should have been addressed a long time ago. So the government, in some cases, is a bit late to the party, but better late than never.
Better late than never. Do you think we're seeing the end?
I certainly hope so, and I think most people in the country will hope so. I think it makes it rather difficult for those people who are still conducting industrial action, still conducting the withdrawal of their labour. I note that the medical unions have, in principle, agreed that an uplift of circa 2% on average to the 3.5 that was already on the table is enough to go back to work. That makes the BMA's request of 35% uplift for the junior doctors seem rather extreme in anyone's view. So I think they're going to have difficulty. I just wanted to pick up on what Paul said, though, because I'm a Conservative, it's because I believe in freedom under the law and the freedom of the individual that I believe in people's right to withdraw their labour. And I think people very easily mislead themselves with caricatures sometimes in politics. But on the other hand, whilst I accept many people withdrew their labour for the reasons Paul was saying, others, it's very clear to me, did so because they saw a political opportunity. And I'm talking about the Mick Lynches of this world who like to bang the table and say, and I paraphrase what he said, it doesn't matter which strike it is, you've got to support it. You know, everybody out. And when you get to that kind of position, when you're perilously close to the kind of general strike territory, that, Michelle, that's when you find that people are doing things for party political reasons and partisan reasons. I'm not saying Paul did that or his union did, but I'm saying there was certainly more than a whiff of that about.
Well, I accidentally, I grant you that, I found myself in the middle of the protest on Wednesday, right? I was trying my hardest
Did you have your placard?
No, I was trying to actually get to Doncaster to do the
You weren't
budget
crossing
show.
a picket line, are you?
Well, no, the protest was going this way, and I was trying to get through it and go that way. And I
Going
did
against the
see...
tide, as usual.
I was. And I was thinking, cool, I wonder if anyone recognised me off GB News when I've been sitting there saying, don't go on strike and all the rest of it. But anyway, I was quite surprised at how many placards were saying, like, Tory scum, Tories out, and there was like a huge sentiment that was anti-Tory. Do you think that's fair? Because do you look at this and think, actually, this is a Tory issue or not?
Well, let me tell you how it works. I've been involved on the left for many, many years, and what happens whenever there's strike action, which is getting quite a bit of media coverage, you will always get various kind of disparate far-left groups who will hitch their wagons to that particular strike, will turn up on the picket line, will dish out their placards saying Tory scum and Tory out and all the rest of it, Tories out. But these people are usually not representative, certainly not of the wider left more broadly, and certainly not representative of the people taking strike action. So I wouldn't necessarily read too much into the placards that are being waved by the people on the picket lines. I mean, in terms of Alex's point, look, I mean, the RMT isn't even affiliated to the Labour Party, so I reject the idea that it's a party political thing. The RMT has, over recent years, been a very critical voice against the Labour Party. The RMT has been on strike under Labour governments. The Fire Brigades Union, I've been on strike under Labour government. So I don't accept that it's purely about, look, the Tories are in, let's hold a strike because we want to get rid of them, when they've been on strike under Labour governments as well. I also don't accept, by the way, that the vast majority of people, and I'm not saying you were saying this, but I don't believe the vast majority of people who are taking strike action at the moment are doing so because they have any political designs.
No, I meant the leadership. I didn't mean people.
No, I accept that. Because these disputes don't come out of a clear blue sky. They are a direct consequence of the economic landscape in which people are finding themselves. You know, the biggest squeeze on workers' wages since Napoleonic times, falling real wages, crashing living standards and so on. So it is no surprise that in those circumstances you will get more and more people willing to say, I'm not going to put up with this anymore. I'm suffering financially. The economy isn't working for me. I'm prepared to take strike action in order to try to rectify the problems that I'm facing at the moment. That's the reality of why people are taking action.
The issue on cost of living is apparent, I think, to all of us. So if I do what's interesting and pick on the point of dispute between us, I think Paul and I aren't quite on the same page about the rhetoric. I, of course, accept that people who are motivated enough to go on a rally and hold up a placard are almost by definition not representative of the broader voting population, because most of us don't, for better or worse. Perhaps it'd be better if we did all go out and voice our political views in the street, but most people don't. So I accept your premise that most people aren't as driven as that. But the tendency to call Tories evil, the tendency to say, you know, Tories are scum, never kissed a Tory in their bio, Tories out, hate Tories, that that is a far more prevalent thing on the left than it is on the right. You don't, I mean, the people on the right tend to think that people on the left are mistaken or are under a misapprehension about how the world works, are perhaps naive, and may, because of those things, lead to bad government. We don't think they're evil. And the reverse is not the case. So there is an asymmetry that I think is broader than a small group that Paul was talking about.
I think that's fair, actually. I think that's a reasonable point. I often have arguments with people on the left who think they are, when it comes to the politics, think they are inherently better people than people on the other side of the argument. And often, actually, they are people I would not particularly want to associate with on a personal level, because they themselves are driven by nastiness and unpleasantness and sectarianism.
Say something fair to Paul. The people who do that tend not to be the old left, actually, who don't mind a political ding-dong on the issues and then may go into government, come out of government, sit in opposition and do their best as a loyal opposition. The most extreme in the modern age tend to be a kind of new left liberal movement who regard themselves as so tolerant they cannot tolerate any other perspective.
I find that hilarious. And by the way, a lot of this comes from the very top, by the way, because everyone, I'm sure, will remember Angela Rayner's rants when she was going, I mean, she was apoplectic, wasn't she, with rage almost, going on about scum and racist and all the rest of it.
But the thing is, Michelle, and we saw the thing with Lucy Powell, the Labour frontbencher last year, where she was wearing the T-shirt, never kissed me. Sorry. Now, that's student politics, I think. That has no place in mainstream, adult, grown-up parliamentary politics. But the point is, for the Labour Party, if they are serious about forming a government, they have to win Tory voters. They have to win Red Wall voters who have gone to the Tories and people outside of the Red Wall who currently vote Tory, and they've got to win their hearts and minds. And you're not going to do that by calling Tories scum or by saying that you would never kiss one. If people in the Red Wall and elsewhere who have decided to vote Tory see the Labour Party referring to them, because they will infer that they're talking about them in those sorts of derogatory terms, it's no wonder they will say, sorry, I'm not going to be casting my ballot for you. That seems to me pretty obvious.
And I think you see it on social media, don't you? Because you get, I mean, anyone that uses Twitter will probably have been abused at some point in their lives. And it always makes me laugh when you get all this abuse and you click on the profile, see who's doing it, and it always says, hashtag be kind.
Yeah,
and it's like, what you really mean is be kind to everyone that you agree with, and heaven forbid you dare come across someone that you disagree with. Well, all bets are off. You can do what you want with them.
That's right. And some of that vitriol, by the way, is reserved for other people on the left, so it's left-on-left hostility, and it's the most dogged left person who doesn't think that in their words, Blairite, or the person who should F off and join the Tories, doesn't think they're sound enough. You know, if you tell someone to F off and join the Tories long enough, sometimes they do.
One of my viewers, Stephen, has just been in touch saying, Michelle, I think you're missing the point, you lot. Many working people in a union already vote Tories. They are Tories. Not every union member, he says, is Labour. You are, of course, right. Tony says, can you ask the panel, would the strikes have happened if Labour were in government? And do they think they'd get a better offer under Labour than Tory? Do you reckon this would have all happened if Labour were in charge, Paul?
Yeah, I think they probably would have done. As I said, I've known strike action. I've been on strike under a Labour government. You only have to think of the so-called winter of discontent in the late 70s to see that unions are not reluctant to take on Labour governments when they feel that it's necessary to do so. Yes, I think the strikes would have taken place. I think they would have largely, in most cases, been settled quicker with better offers. That's my view.
I think there would have been some strikes, but it would have depended on the timing in the political cycle. If Keir Starmer, for argument's sake, had just got into government, there would have been a debate within the union movement. On the one hand, we should back off a bit and let them have a bit of space, in a way. Some unionists would have thought that, some union leaders would have thought that. In a way, they certainly don't think about the Tories. And others would have said, finally, we've got a real opportunity to capitalise. Now is the time, now is the time. The point is you can have both of those pressures at once. Just as, to take Paul's point about the RMT, you don't have to be pro-Labour to be anti-Tory. There are some people in the militant aspect of the union movement who basically none of the current political leadership will satisfy them. They thought Corbyn was a bit soft.
Yeah, and let's not forget, by the way, that one of the reasons we have the economic situation that we have now is because of all of the prolonged lockdown ridiculousness. And let's let's not forget that Labour were very uncomfortable with Boris Johnson lifting the regulations at the pace in which he did. So perhaps if Labour were in charge...
There were a lot of unions.
Yeah, so, you saw what the unions did with schools, for example. So yes, I think is the short answer to your question there. Paul says using members of the public as human shields throughout these negotiations has been disgusting. I have to say the strike action is something that very much divides you guys at home. Keep your thoughts coming in, whichever side of the fence you are on now. Have you seen the news today that Vladimir Putin has been issued with an arrest warrant for war crimes? I mean, does that have any traction? Do you actually ever think that that will happen? Give me your thoughts. But also, Slovakia now has joined Poland in sending fighter jets to Ukraine. Should we follow suit? Your thoughts, and I'll see you in 2.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512,
Virgin Media Channel 604,
Freesat Channel 216,
Freeview Channel 236,
and YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio,
with the GB News app, and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prison.
I'm completely stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Dewbs and Co.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Click that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions are, those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Dewbs and Co. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me. So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Hello there, I'm Michelle Dewberry, keeping you company until 7 o'clock tonight. The 2 men I'm trying to educate in the joys of Ann Summers' parties in the break, they're Alex Dean, political consultant, and Paul Embry, the fireman, writer and broadcaster. So much fun. So much fun. And if any ladies are out there that have been to an Ann Summers party, you'll know exactly what I mean. Anyway, let's move on. You don't need to blush, Paul. We're all adults here, aren't we? Right, today the International Criminal Court in The Hague has issued arrest warrants for the Russian President, Putin, over alleged war crimes. I've got to say, I mean, how much this is worth its weight in paper. Some people are saying it's absolutely not at all. The Kremlin, of course, have responded, saying that the arrest warrant had no significance whatsoever and was basically ridiculous. Anyway, moving on as well, Slovakia has also joined Poland, you might have seen this, in providing fighter jets to Ukraine. Pick whichever angle you want there. Well, in fact, let's do both. You know what? Let's do both. First and foremost, is Putin the war crimes thing? Do you ever think that something will happen? Do you think he'll get arrested off the back of it?
I doubt very much he will ever face justice, absent some kind of popular uprising in Russia, which seems extremely unlikely given although past performance is no guarantee of future returns. It seems that in Russia there just isn't the ability to rise up, or will, or a combination of the two, in a way that would be required for Putin to be out of power and facing charges. But I don't agree with you that it means nothing. Apart from anything else, we have always thought, I think, that it'll be very difficult, much harder than some people think, for Russia to re-enter the nation, the community of nations, and to be trading again and enter into new agreements with other countries. But it formalises that for as long as Putin is there, that they are led by someone who faces alleged war crimes. And it hastens amongst the larger body of Russian leadership a desire for a post-Putin age. Because if you want to move on from this conflict in Ukraine, if you want to restore Russia to something approaching normality in international relations, then we've thought for some time you're going to need to not have Putin there. But now, if he's facing war crimes in The Hague, you definitely do. So I don't think it doesn't mean anything.
But do you think China will care? Because I just think that kind of thing will just push Russia back closer into bed with China.
That's probably the biggest single test, because we've known for some time Putin's not going to be going on a tour of European capitals outside of Belarus. He's not going to be going around European countries anytime soon. But we talk as if we've cut Russia off from the world with the sanctions regimes that are in place, and we haven't. We've cut him off from the Western world. And the Chinese decision will be the largest single one on what happens next. China is going to have to decide, does it wish to pursue a path of kind of creative ambiguity and creative neutrality, trying to play both sides, or to choose one? My instinct is they'll keep on trying to have the best of both worlds for as long as they can.
And let's not forget, it was China the other day, wasn't it, who came out with a peace plan. That surprised a few people. Paul, where do you stand on it?
I mean, I have no particular problem with our arming Ukraine to defend itself against what is unquestionably a barbaric invasion.
Oh, what about the fighter jet part? Yeah.
Yeah. In terms of giving the arms necessary to Ukraine, my concern is it never seems to be accompanied by any proposals since this aspect of the war has been taking place now for over a year. It never seems to be accompanied by any serious proposals for peace, with anyone with influence in the West saying, OK, of course the invasion is wrong, of course we need to allow Ukraine to defend itself, but the long-term or even medium-term or even short-term strategy needs to be, how do we bring about a ceasefire? Because there are thousands of people, men, women and children being slaughtered. How do we get a lasting peace? What will those proposals
But China,
look like?
I know it's not the West, but China did it, though, didn't they? They came up with
China did it. And what I found really interesting, and I'm no great supporter of the Chinese regime, but what I found interesting is that Zelensky himself initially welcomed the Chinese proposals, or certainly said that he was prepared to speak to the Chinese about them. And Putin, as you might expect, also said something similar. But it seems to me that Biden and the UK and others poo-pooed it and effectively said, well, no, you're not going to have any part of it. Now, why, if the two leaders themselves, who are the main belligerents in the conflict, are prepared to say, look, this is something possibly we can work with. It may have come to nothing, but this is something possibly we can work with.
Paul, they still
then
can.
Who are we to say this won't work, we're going to overrule you effectively, and this isn't even going to get off the ground?
Well, I'm not sure anyone in the West has overruled Zelensky. I mean, Zelensky's popularity is sky high in the West, and if he wants to go to a conference coordinated by the Chinese, I don't think anyone in the Western world will have the political clout to stop him. But the bigger question, I think, I doubt that would succeed, but he's entitled to give it a go. It's worth saying that Britain's record on this stuff is actually, in the post-war era, pretty solid. Now, whatever you think of the conflicts concerned and how they played out, Britain was one of the guarantor powers in Cyprus. It was Paddy Ashdown in his role as representative to the former Yugoslavia that played a part in seeking to stitch together the post-conflict environment on our European doorstep. I think that, I hope that our country has something to offer in that too. But for the time being, I would say we've got to support Ukraine in the conflict.
So does that mean sending fighter jets then?
I would. I would, as long as they're not mixing my metaphors, they're not white elephants, as long as they're not actually unhelpful, right? Because it seems to me that the jets produced by and owned by Britain, whilst relatively small in number, which is one point, are also not the kind of jets that any Ukrainian pilot has been trained on. And if a better British contribution in this example is a cash equivalent, such that they can fly MiGs or whatever is coming out of France and Germany, so that their pilots are better able to fly those planes, then I'd be open to that too. But in answer to the principle, yes.
Do you have any concern about escalation, retaliation?
Well, not for supplying munitions and material. If that was going to happen, I think we're well. I know, but I still think we're well past. That's a difference potentially a difference in magnitude, but it's not a difference in principle from what we've been doing. Differences now would be of a different kind of involvement, and it's the Americans who've come closest with that, with their drone that had to ditch itself, having been whacked by a Russian jet.
I was just going to make that very point, actually. I mean, look, history tells us that conflicts can often kick off when people are least expecting them. And sometimes it takes a spark that no one was anticipating. And I said on the programme, Michelle, a few weeks ago that, few people in 1914, when what happened in Sarajevo in terms of the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, would have predicted just before that happened that within just a few weeks the whole of Europe was going to be involved in one of the most traumatic and biggest wars of all time, in which thousands lost their lives. That almost came out of nowhere. And I think people are not kind of understanding history when they think that kind of thing cannot happen again. What we're seeing, I think, is the world kind of dividing again into these big competing blocks. And sometimes all it takes is that particular spark for the whole thing to kick off. Now, the drone thing, I think, was very worrying. I think, Biden standing in Poland, which was obviously a former Eastern Bloc country just a few weeks ago, and sabre rattling, and at the same time, on the same day, Putin withdrawing Russia from a nuclear treaty. All of these things have got the capacity to grow. All of these things have got the capacity to ignite the situation, to inflame the situation even worse. And I just think it's very, very complacent to just assume, as I think lots of people out there are doing, that we can just continually supply Ukraine with more and more arms, not make any kind of effort to establish any sort of peace plan, and just think that nothing's going to come of that. Don't worry, this won't kick off any greater. It will be contained within Ukraine. You can bet your life on it. I don't think we can bet on that.
I've got a few people in my inbox saying if there's an arrest warrant out for anyone for war crimes, it should be Tony Blair. That is a sentiment that's coming through thick and fast in my inbox tonight, I can tell you that. Bernard says, Michelle, we should have been shoulder to shoulder with Ukraine, giving them whatever they needed from the very beginning. Sean says, Michelle, we should be in there with the SAS. We should get a hold of Putin ourselves and drag him before the ICC. There's lots of divided opinions here in terms of how involved we should be, whose war this is, and I'm sure you will keep your thoughts coming. Richard says no, quite a few no's actually, when it comes to sending planes. A few of you don't think that the arrest warrants are worth the paper they're written on, but that isn't stopping you calling for them for Tony Blair, and you're extending that to President Bush as well. Keep your thoughts coming in on that one. I'll have some more of your responses in a couple of minutes, but also I want you to ponder this, if you will. Do you think a serial killer should be allowed to get married in jail? I do not. I'm talking about Levi Belfield. Your thoughts? I'll see you in 2. What loads of people are saying about...
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat.
Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. I campaigned in the largest democratic vote in our island story. I know this country has so much to be proud of. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better. The wisdom of the nation is in its people. Vox Populi, Vox Dei. That's why I'm joining the People's Channel. Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
I'd be Alex Dean, the political consultant, and Paul Embry, fireman, writer and broadcaster. Welcome back, everybody. Still divided opinion on the Ukraine situation as to whether or not we should send fighter jets over there. 50-50, I'd say you all are. Still, you're all writing in to tell me that it is Tony Blair that you would like to see an arrest warrant issued for war crimes, as opposed to, well, not as opposed to Putin. I don't think you're saying as opposed to Putin. I think you're saying in addition, you would like to see one of those warrants out for Tony Blair. Anyway, keep your thoughts coming in. Let me talk to you, though, now about prisoners. Do you know the name Levi Belfield? Does that mean anything to you? He's the serial killer, of course, that killed, among others, Millie Dowler. Now, he is in prison, multiple life sentences, quite frankly, and he wants to get married. I mean, the fact that somebody would actually want to marry Levi Belfield in the first place is something that confuses me no end. Why on earth would anyone sit there and go, oh, yeah, I know the man for me. It's that fella there that's raped and murdered people multiple times. Yeah, great, he sounds like a winner. Anyway, that aside, do you think that someone like Levi Belfield should be able to get married in prison, Paul?
No, I thought about this, and we had a debate on the show recently where we talked about whether prisoners should be entitled to paid work, and you know what should come with that in terms of employment protections and pensions and things like that. And I was in favour of that because it seems to me that you're actually contributing to wider society when you do that, as well as kind of doing something that may well reintegrate you back into society and give you the skills that are necessary for you to get a job again in the outside world. I think the issue of marriage is very different, actually, because it strikes me that marriage is one of those privileges that are associated specifically with being a free person in a free society outside the walls of a prison. And when you commit a crime and you're incarcerated, obviously you lose your freedoms, and I think you should lose certain liberties with that. And it seems to me, actually, that marriage is probably one of those that it's fair to say, actually, you can't do that when you're in prison. I think there are probably some exceptional circumstances, for example, if the prisoner himself or herself is suffering from a terminal illness, or if their partner is suffering from a terminal illness.
Why would that make you? If you're not coming out of prison anyway, for example, why would it matter if you're about to die or not?
Because I think there's an argument to say that purely on compassionate grounds, if somebody, be it the prisoner or the partner, is about to die, then I think it would be quite callous to say, even in these circumstances, we're not going to allow you to tie the knot.
Nah.
So I think I know you're
a nicer man than me.
Well, I know you're a hardliner on this, Michelle.
The minute you start torturing kids, murdering people, I'm really sorry, but any right to compassion, that went out the window the moment you started behaving like that. So not for me. That does not wash with me. You're a nice man.
You're a hang 'em and flog 'em merchant, aren't you?
Yeah, you know, I just think at the end of the day, if you want your human rights to be respected, it's very simple. Respect the human rights of others. And if you don't have that within you and actually you want to trample all over the human rights of other people, well, you know what? You reap what you sow. Maybe I should be a prison governor. There'd be no messing around on my block, I could tell you that.
It would definitely be category A, wouldn't it?
Oh, I wouldn't have no messing around. Alex?
I don't think you should be a prison governor, Michelle.
Why?
You've both referred to marriage as a privilege. It's not a privilege for the rest of us as long as we are adult and freely consenting and not already married to somebody else. So if you are going to change the law such that some people can't get married, then you should put it through the House of Commons and then through the House of Lords, passing a law saying so, rather than simply saying that people can't from some regulatory perspective. I say this because I respect and believe in the rule of law, which is there to protect...
Alex.
Hang on, it's there to protect all of us. If you've passed a law, preferably in a manifesto from a party that wins a majority, if you pass a law that goes through Parliament that says this, then I've got no trouble with your position, given the freedoms that we curtail of people who go to prison per se, as Paul has rightly outlined. But your position, Michelle, seems to me to be wholly wrong, because you can curtail somebody's fundamental freedoms in this country in two... you can test the curtailment of their freedom in two ways. The first is through legislation, and the second is through cases being brought to the court. And it was certainly Patrick earlier, and I assume you too, don't want a prisoner to have that ability either. You don't want him to be able to conduct judicial review or take a case to the Court of European Human Rights, to which we are still subject. Well, if that's your view, why bother having a lawyer? Why bother letting them have a lawyer for judicial review? Then why bother letting them have a lawyer for appeals? Then why bother letting them have a lawyer for trials? Then why bother letting them have trials?
I would restrict their rights to the absolute bare minimum, and we do curtail the lives of prisoners, but not least by locking them in a box.
Of course we do, but we don't curtail their ability to go to the law, and that's what you in the channel all day have been saying, that he shouldn't be able to conduct judicial review either, and that's where you lose me, because it's always going to be the worst cases that provoke the most outcry when they seek to conduct judicial review. Or no one's going to complain when the nicest person in the world seeks an appeal or judicial review. It's always through hard cases, and therefore it seems to me, especially, and not in this case, but especially when it's somebody who's wrongly accused but the case looks very strong against them, those legal rules that entitle somebody to bring an appeal or entitle them to bring a case for a judicial review are there to protect all of us. And when the case looks the worst against you, that's when you will need help the most. And so it's bad cases that always provoke this kind of outcry. But in the end, those rules are there to protect all of us. When you start restricting them, you restrict those freedoms for all of us.
Dominic Raab himself, he's trying to pass a new law, for example, that would try and stop these goings-on.
But the thing about that, Michelle, is pass the law and then the person can't get married. Don't say they can't get married before you've passed the law. That, for me, is a classic example of government overreach.
Is it? Do you agree with that? Is it overreach?
I do. I mean, I certainly think that, you could be the worst person in the world for all sorts of reasons, but you still have to be granted the fundamental rights in terms of being able to challenge the law that are available to every other person. And I think, Alex was a lawyer, I'm not, but I think there's some saying hard cases make bad law or something like that. And you do have to, it's like freedom of speech, isn't it? It's a similar principle that you have to allow it for people who you fundamentally disagree with and whose views you find abhorrent.
Correct.
If you believe in it, you've got to make space for those people. And I think it's the same with the law. People are entitled to challenge the law and to have access to lawyers to do it on their behalf, even if they might be absolute scumbags like Levi Belfield. I think that's a fair position.
Free speech for speech you agree with is no free speech at all. And freedom under the law, just for people that you like, is no freedom under the law either.
So you, in summary, think that he should, because the rules are the rules and we should respect the rules, you think he should be able to get married, this fella in prison?
I mean, I can't imagine who wants to marry him, but yes.
Well, somebody does.
But yes, and it seems to me the extension of your position, Michelle, you were sort of half-jokingly going along with hanging and flogging. There are plenty of people in this country who do agree with the death penalty. I happen not to be one of them. But I respect the fact that many people do. But if we were to have the death penalty carried out in our prisons against people duly convicted, I would prefer it happened after the Commons had voted to restore the death penalty to our statute books, rather than prison governors and Home Secretaries going around saying off with their heads because they fancied it.
And then
that ain't the rule of law.
wishy-washy liberal, Alex.
There you are, bleeding heart.
I do, in certain cases, I would actually be open. I'd certainly be open for it to go to referendum about bringing back capital punishment in certain instances. So when it was proved beyond any doubt.
And I would disagree with you, and I would campaign against you. And if I lost, I would accept the verdict of my fellow men and women in Britain, whilst I might lament the decision that we had made as a country. But at least we would have had the debate, had a vote, and then it would have gone through Parliament. None of that has happened with the debates, the topic we're discussing today, and therefore my view is different.
Michael, you just made me laugh. You said, Michelle, give the guy a break. Life in jail is punishment enough without him being married as well. Right, keep your thoughts coming in. Lots more to come up as well. Did you see the Oxfam, the language inclusion guide? I'll be looking at that. I'll also have some of your feedback. Lots of you on that marriage one. Where do you say? I absolutely say don't give him any rights, but Alex makes a very good point, which is that is not the law. And if you want to live in a society that is governed by decent laws, then they need to apply to everyone, even those we don't like. Annoying, isn't it? Give me your thoughts. GBViews at gbnews.uk.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dewbs & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m, and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, I'm Michelle Dewbs, keeping you company till 7 alongside me, Alex Dean, the political consultant, and Paul Embry, the fireman, writer and broadcaster. Dewberry Arms is officially open.
Cheers.
Gentlemen, my favourite part
Cheers.
of the week. Look at how sophisticated I am with my little plastic Prosecco glass.
Are you not trusted with glassware?
I'm not trusted with glassware because sometimes my panellists infuriate me so much I would probably launch it, and if it's plastic it wouldn't hurt. So I think that's why we get it.
That's an expensive Bollinger, really. You're trying to play the ordinary person
This
here by
is
saying you're down in
GBNews.
Prosecco.
I would love it. I would love it. Yeah, next week if anyone wants to bring me a very expensive champagne, I'd be right up for it. But it's definitely, I can confirm, definitely not. I had an interesting... This part of the show, by the way, is just where we recap on things that have caught our eyes. Someone has just emailed in, and I'm trying to find it. I think your name was Paul. You've just emailed in to say that you completely agreed with me. Oh, yeah, there you are, Paul. Completely, Michelle, you are completely right. I think your two guests have had a bad week. They're not thinking straight. He says, when you go into prison, you're for wrongdoing, you lose all your rights. Well done for standing up to the two guys. But I hate to break it to you, Paul, Alex is absolutely right. And it is very frustrating indeed, because what Alex is saying is if you want to live in a country that is governed by law, the law has to apply equally, even to those people that we really, really despise, I have to say. Anyway, so yeah, it does pain me to say it on that particular subject, but I think you're right.
Thank you very much.
Oxfam. Has anyone seen this story? It caught my eye today. It's Mother's Day this weekend, but we do need to be careful, it seems, these days when it comes to the word mother and father. Apparently, these have been deemed potentially offensive by Oxfam. The charity says we should use the term parent instead. Well, I'm a mum. It's the most proudest achievement of my life. Very, very proud of it. I am too. I wouldn't appreciate someone calling me a parent in order not to offend me by calling me a mum. I think it's ridiculous. Paul, where do you stand on it all? Hang on, never mind, Paul, where do you stand on it all? I've just been distracted. Look at his glass, everyone. Look at Alex Dean's glass.
It's just the first of the
Can
day.
we just take a moment to reflect on that? Where is the camera? Look at it. I don't know what camera to hold that up to. If you're listening, not watching, oh, look, all you can see is my armpit. There you go. That's Alex.
No, I don't want your slot. I don't want your backwash, Paul.
If you're listening, not watching, so you can't see what's going on. We just poured a drink. I've had a delicate ladylike sip. I think Paul's had two. Alex Dean's downed his pint.
Just the first of the night is always, you know, the second drink of the day is one of the most important decisions. The first just doesn't even touch the sides.
Second drink of the day is usually for him about 9 o'clock in the morning.
Steady, Paul, not true. That's my first.
Goodness me. Anyway, I was saying, you distracted me then. Go on, Paul.
Where were we?
Paul, yeah. Sorry, Paul, go.
I used to think that laughter was the best kind of response to these sorts of stories and these sorts of organisations who are peddling this kind of nonsense. I'm not so sure, actually, now, because it seems to me that the whole thing is becoming a bit like Japanese knotweed. It's kind of taking hold more and more, both within our public institutions and a lot of our private institutions, actually, and corporations and what have you. So I don't necessarily think that laughter is now the best response, because I think that it's now having a serious impact in terms of the influence that it's gathering. So I think there's an argument to say that when the likes of Oxfam, and what they're doing here seems to be completely beyond their remit, when they peddle this sort of stuff, I think we need to hit back hard. And if that means a boycott, then I think that's probably something that's justified. Because I just sense now that we're on a bit of a, you know, I would describe it as a never-ending treadmill with this stuff, where these organisations are constantly looking for the next radical thing to do, and this is where it takes us.
It's completely wrong, and only if people get in touch with Oxfam and say, I have donated, but now I'm not going to because of this, will they change their minds.
I mean, you know what? Nothing against being inclusive. Create new words if you want, but please just leave the whole woman and mother. Just leave it alone. If you're offended, call yourself something else instead of insisting that everyone else has to do the same. Look at the time it flies when you're having fun. Graham says, there's more chance of me winning the lottery than getting an email comment read out on Michelle Dewbs' show. Well, it's your lucky night, Graham. Buy your ticket, get yourself a lucky dip, and if you do win, get in touch with me and give me a share. Won't you? Paul says, happy Paddy's Day, everybody. Cheers. It is indeed St Patrick's Day. Happy.
Guinness. We should have had Guinness.
I know, we should have had Guinness.
Nah,
I'm not forward thinking.
Quite hard to get it down in the same
way. You can have
way.
one after the show. That's all I've got time for. Thank you, gents. Thank you for you guys at home. Have a fantastic weekend. I'll see you on Monday.
Hello there. I'm Jonathan Vautry here with your latest weather update from the Met Office. Many of us will have to hold out until Sunday for the best of the weather throughout this weekend, because through Friday evening and into Saturday, it's low pressure that is very much in charge, bringing fronts across much of the UK and then generally